regular supply and demand graph. So the cartridge storming like the party supply. Alright, except that we're looking into the market for loanable funds. And in the market for loanable funds, we don't use a price. We don't use a money price. Instead, we use an interest rate. So we're going to use a little r there to indicate the interest rate. And the reason we're going to use that little r is we're talking about here the real interest rate. What do you mean the real interest rate? Well, the real interest rate would be the interest rate without inflation included. See, because the nominal interest rate that we observe in our contracts, in our loans, and on our bank statements is really equal to the real interest rate plus inflation. You don't understand this intuitively. You've been dealing with money long enough that you realize, look, okay, you got your student loan document and it says that, you're going to have to pay back 8% or 6% or whatever it is. But you understand that that 6% is in nominal terms, not in real terms, because you expect that there's going to be some inflation. The more that you owe, the better the inflation, the bigger the inflation, the better. We can talk about that more later. What we're talking about here is the real interest rate. Well, if the real interest rate isn't the same thing as inflation, where does the real interest rate come from? And the way you can think about this is the story I told about ice cream and gumballs. So I took my kids to the grocery store, and on the way out of the grocery store, there's that little machine where you can buy a gumball for $0.25. My younger daughter said, "Papa, can we have a gumball, please?" And I said, "Well, you could either have a gumball now, or you could have ice cream later." Oh, a dilemma. She says, "I'll have the gumball now." My other daughter's also with us, and she says, "I'll wait and have the ice cream later." Is there something about the value of ice cream and gumballs that is weird? No. Both of them prefer ice cream now over gumballs now. However, ice cream now, for each of them, would be the most preferred thing. But my younger daughter would prefer a gumball now over ice cream later, and my older daughter would prefer ice cream later over a gumball now. Is there something weird about that? Not really. People have different preferences, don't they? People have different preferences based upon their time horizon. How far can you see into the future? It's actually one really good measure of wealth. Right? You could be have a very high income, but also have a lot of debt, and not be able to see very far into the future. Have a very limited time horizon, such that you're anxious about money. You're anxious about having more income to pay the loans and all of the things that you want to buy. Or you could have a low income and still be able to see very far into the future. If you live in a nice, close-knit community where you know that everybody in town's got your back, if something horrible were to happen to you, then you have some stability, some security, and understanding that if anything bad were to happen to you, they would have your back and take care of you. It isn't just about income. It's about how far you can see into the future. And having a shorter time horizon makes you more interested in having stuff earlier. I'd rather have it now than later. So my younger daughter preferred the gumball now over the ice cream later. My older daughter preferred the ice cream later over the gumball now. As a matter of fact, if my older daughter happened to have a gumball on her, she would have been able to sell the gumball and gotten her sister's share of the ice cream after dinner. What's that exchange? That exchange is taking place over time. Over time. And so then we say that the interest rate is the time price of money. It's also the time price of everything else. If a good increases in value over time, then waiting will give you a higher level of pleasure. I once met a wino who was sitting on a bench eating some grapes. And I was like, dude, you have to wait. Because the grapes aren't wine yet, okay? You have to wait. Now, in this particular story, what we say here is that consumers are starting to spend more of their income on goods and services and save less. Which side of the market are the consumers in this picture? Well, households are the group that saves and lends. Firms are those that borrow or invest. The word invest gets confusing because we often think about taking money and buying some stocks and call that investing. But that's not the kind of investing that an economist is talking about. When an economist says investing in this sense, he's saying purchasing of capital and inputs into the production process. Okay? Now, are you involved in purchasing capital? Yes, you are. You're almost all borrowers. You're taking out student loans, many of you anyhow. Well, what are you investing in? That mush between your ears, right? You're investing in your human capital, your knowledge and skills and understanding. That's where the investment is going. You're buying human capital. Why? Because you expect that it's going to help you to have a higher income someday in the future, right? You wouldn't be doing it otherwise, unless you just like being in college. A lot of people go to college for 7 years. College is just fun, fine. If you got the money to do it, okay. But most of us are here, why? To invest in our futures, to develop some human capital. Well, what happens if savers or lenders decide to save less and instead spend more of their income on goods and services? Well, then what happens is that the supply of loanable funds decreases. As a result, the quantity of loanable funds exchanged in the market decreases, and the interest rate goes up. When the interest rate goes up, it means it's more expensive to buy loanable funds. It's more expensive to gain access to loanable funds. So suppose there were a project that has a 7% rate of, or an 8% rate of return, and you can get funds at 7%. Well, then you might borrow those funds, invest in that project, and then take that 8% return to pay off your loan and keep 1% profit for yourself. But if the interest rate goes up to 9%, and your project only has a rate of return of 8%, funding has become too expensive. Your rate of return can't meet the costs of capital, so you're not going to invest. If the interest rate on your student loans got to be too high, you might choose not to go to college. How high would the interest rate have to be to get you to not go to college? How many of you know what interest rate you're paying? Good, okay. It would be worth your while to go and look and actually take it into consideration. What else can we say about this picture here? What's happening when borrowers take that money and invest it is that somebody who had some money today, who could go and buy something with that money, instead decides not to consume today, to postpone consumption until later, and instead to hand the claims to real resources. That's what money is. It's a claim to buy in real resources to somebody else who could do better with it than themselves. Then that person goes and invests that money in capital equipment or in human capital or whatever, and then with the rate of return that they earn, they pay back the person who loaned them the money and get a little bit more for themselves. What's the important element on all this? Time. It takes time. Or, in other words, there is a roundabout process involved whereby our total level of production and our total level of consumption in the future increases. It's just like Robinson Crusoe taking some time away from collecting coconuts and fishes to make a net so that in the future he could get more fishes and coconuts. It's that roundabout process. And that's what the loanable funds market facilitates. By the way, when I built this graph, I should have labeled the graph the market for loanable funds. You should have that on your graph as well, the market for loanable funds. That roundabout process is really important. What makes all this possible is the fact that borrowers and lenders are able to find one another. Can I borrow $300?
If you need it.
Yeah, can I borrow it from you?
If you pay interest, yeah.
Oh, how much?
We'll go 5%.
5%. Okay. Do you think I could get together $2,000 from you all today, right here and now?
No.
Maybe.
It depends on what interest I'm willing to pay. You see, there is a price on your willingness to give up the money that you have now to get more in the future. You have a threshold willingness to pay and borrow. But typically, it's actually quite hard for us, each individually, to find somebody who would be willing to loan us money. Similarly, it's hard to find somebody to whom we would be willing to lend money. What do you know about me? How do I spend my money? What am I going to do with that money? Am I really going to be able to pay you back, or am I going to default on that loan? That could be risky. All that information that borrowers and lenders need in order to have a secure transaction, they can't be doing that themselves, or they could, but it would take a lot of time and energy. As a result, there are a lot of costs involved, transaction costs, involved in trying to find somebody to whom you can lend to, or from whom you can borrow. The bank enters in, and as a result of the bank being there, more exchanges can be consummated, and they are acting like a middleman, just like the florist does, helping to pair borrowers and lenders together, helping to evaluate your credit worthiness, helping to provide lenders with an opportunity to lend to somebody who will be able to pay them back in the future. The role of financial intermediation by banks and other entities that handle these kinds of transactions is really, really important. Without a smooth financial intermediation process, it's really hard to borrow and lend. It increases the transactions costs, which means that less stuff gets invested, which means that there's less roundaboutness, which decreases our overall level of productivity looking into the future and slows economic growth. Without financial intermediation, all of that slows down. And it's because of innovations in financial intermediation that we have been able to